A Bohemian princess rejected an emperor's marriage proposal to live in radical poverty, build hospitals for the poor, and become one of the most unlikely saints in medieval Europe. Agnes of Bohemia was born into power in Prague, in the heart of medieval Bohemia. Most modern biographies place her birth on 20th of January 1211 as a daughter of King Ottokar I. Her mother was Queen Constance of Hungary, linking Agnes to the dynastic politics of Central Europe. Family ties mattered because her cousin was Elizabeth of Hungary, later honored for radical charity. Agnes grew up in a world where royal daughters were bargaining pieces in alliances and succession plans. From childhood, she was sent into convent environments that shaped her imagination and education. Sources describe her formation among religious communities, including Cistercian influence in her early schooling. This matters because monastic life gave her a countermodel to court life, luxury, and marriage politics. As she approached adolescence, marriage negotiations accelerated around her name, title, and dowry. Agnes was repeatedly betrothed in arrangements designed to bind powerful houses together. One prominent engagement connected her to the imperial orbit of the Holy Roman Empire. Traditional Catholic reference works even describe a betrothal involving Emperor Frederick II. Whatever the exact list of suitors, the basic pattern is consistent across accounts and across centuries. Agnes was expected to marry for the realm, not for affection, and certainly not for personal vocation. Yet, as she matured, she formed a decision that shocked the logic of dynastic strategy. She resolved to refuse marriage proposals and to dedicate herself entirely to God in religious life. Even hostile reactions in the political world could not easily undo a royal woman's public vow. Later writers remembered a famous remark attributed to Frederick II about her choosing the King of Heaven. Agnes returned to Prague with a freedom that was rare for a woman of her rank. She did not simply withdraw because she used royal resources to build institutions that changed the city. In the 1230s, she founded a major charitable complex that combined care for the poor and a religious house. A hospital dedicated to St. Francis became a focal point for her plan of mercy and discipline. Alongside the hospital, she established a monastery for the poor ladies, later widely called the Poor Clares. She also supported Franciscan friars in Prague, bringing the new mendicant movement into Bohemia's capital. The site on the Vltava's bank became one of the earliest Gothic religious complexes in Prague. It also became a dynastic burial place for the Přemyslid family, tying piety to royal memory. Today, the convent of St. Agnes still stands in Prague as a witness to that 13th century vision. Agnes's spirituality was strongly shaped by the Franciscan ideal of poverty and humility. She learned about Clare of Assisi through the friars minor who had recently arrived in Prague. Clare had founded a women's form of Franciscan life marked by enclosure and radical dependence on God. Agnes recognized in Clare's example a concrete blueprint for her own desire to renounce status. A correspondence began between the two women, carried by friars traveling between Bohemia and Assisi. The surviving letters are treated by scholars as primary sources for early Franciscan women's spirituality. They show a relationship that was intimate, instructive, and sustained, even though the two never met in person. Clare addressed Agnes with warmth and urgency, encouraging her to persevere in poverty and single-hearted devotion. Agnes, for her part, pressed for a form of life that would not compromise the poverty she believed God wanted. One recurring tension involved practical stability, because institutions like hospitals often produced income and property. The letters and related documents show negotiations around papal guidance and the desire to protect the privilege of poverty. Agnes formally entered the poor Clare life at Prague during Pentecost in 1234. In the Vatican's account of her canonization, this entry is linked to solemn vows of chastity, poverty, and obedience. Her move was not symbolic because she embraced real community discipline and real service to the sick. Accounts describe her doing the practical work of a nun, including care for the poor and the marginalized. She was later elected abbess, meaning she held authority inside the cloister without returning to courtly power. Her abbacy connected the contemplative life of the monastery with the outward mercy of the attached hospital. This blend of enclosure and charity became one of her most distinctive marks in later memory. A crucial part of Agnes's legacy is the institutional structure she built for lasting charitable care. At the hospital, a lay and religious fraternity emerged to serve the elderly, sick, and poor. This community developed into the Knights of the Cross, with the Red Star, a uniquely Bohemian hospitaller order. Modern summaries date the hospital fraternity's foundation to 1233, tied directly to Agnes's initiative. In 1235, the hospital received significant endowment, including property once associated with the Teutonic Knights. Pope Gregory IX confirmed and structured aspects of this work through official interventions in the mid-1230s. Some accounts specify a papal bull, Omnipotens Deus, elevating the fraternity toward an independent order in 1237. The order adopted the rule of St. Augustine and focused on organized service rather than military conquest. By 1252, the order is recorded as moving near the Charles Bridge area, serving as caregivers and even bridge keepers. The point is simple because Agnes created a system where charity could outlast her lifetime and outlast politics. Medieval sources also connect Agnes with stories of extraordinary spiritual gifts and public influence. The Catholic Encyclopedia claims she was favored with the gift of miracles in the language of older hagiography. It also reports a prophecy that her brother Wenceslaus would defeat the Duke of Austria in battle. Other modern summaries mention traditions of visions and healings circulating around her name. These reports are difficult to pin to one documented event because 13th century records are uneven. What is historically clear is her consistent pattern of renunciation, governance, and institutional charity in Prague. Her reputation for sanctity began quickly after her death, which is typical for a founder who reshaped civic life. Agnes lived a long cloistered life compared with many medieval saints, spanning decades of European upheaval. She remained in the monastery she founded, guiding the community through illness, suffering, and ordinary hardship. She died in Prague on 2nd March 1282, the date most commonly given in modern references. Older reference works sometimes give 1281, or an uncertain year, which shows how medieval chronology can blur. Her body and memory were tied to the convent complex, which later became her major shrine and symbolic home. Over time, the convent endured decline, suppression, and later restoration, reflecting the region's turbulent religious history. Yet, devotion to Agnes persisted for centuries, even when institutions around her were threatened or transformed. Recognition by the wider church took an unusually long time, and that delay became part of her story. Her formal beatification process was opened in the 19th century, long after medieval veneration had matured. Pope Pius X beatified her in 1874, restoring official recognition to a devotion rooted in Bohemia's past. More than a century later, Pope John Paul II canonized her in Rome on 12 November 1989. The canonization mass explicitly paired her with Brother Albert Chmielowski, linking two Franciscan-inspired lives across centuries. In his homily, John Paul II emphasized her Christian faith and heroic charity as a model for imitation. He highlighted her rejection of marriage proposals and her decision to glorify God through a life of service. He also named her Hospital of St. Francis and her monastery for the poor sisters as concrete works of mercy. The homily points to her friendship with Clare of Assisi through letters lasting almost 20 years without meeting. That detail matters because it shows how ideas and vows traveled in medieval Europe without modern communication. Agnes is often remembered as a patron of the Czech Republic and as a symbol of national spiritual identity. Modern Czech memory has also connected her canonization in 1989 with a broader cultural moment of hope and change. Even when you set politics aside, her life still reads as a deliberate inversion of expected royal destiny. A princess used her dowry not to secure a dynasty, but to build a hospital and a religious community. A woman raised for court chose enclosure, obedience, and labor, and she treated the poor as her true neighbors. A founder did not merely give alms because she designed institutions that professionalized care for the unwanted. A corresponded friendship with Clare of Assisi anchored her choices in a wider Franciscan movement, and a long-delayed canonization eventually placed her publicly before the whole Church as a lasting witness. When March 2nd arrives, the Church's memory turns to Agnes at the end of her earthly life in Prague. Her feast invites attention to a specific geography because her sanctity is embedded in a real city and riverbank. It also invites attention to a specific choice because she refused what her world called success. Agnes of Bohemia is remembered for poverty with dignity, authority without vanity, and charity with structure. Her story is not a fable about escaping responsibility because she assumed a heavier responsibility on purpose. She shows how a single decision can redirect wealth into mercy and prestige into service. And she shows how holiness can be built in stone, in rules, in letters, and in daily care for the sick. If you visit Prague today, the former convent of St. Agnes still preserves the outline of her foundation. It stands as a reminder that medieval sanctity was not only private prayer, but public architecture and civic care. The hospital, the monastery, and the later Hospitaller order reveal a saint who organized compassion. That is why March 2nd is not just a date on a calendar, but a doorway into her Prague-shaped legacy.